Hi guys, Goffey here and welcome back to the channel. Over the last sort of 6 months or so, I've been on a bit of a mission to try and make my images look more like film, to take digital and make it film-like. Now, one of the stumbling blocks of the last few months has been the fact that the grain in Lightroom just doesn't look like film. But I think I finally cracked the secret, and that's what I want to share with you today. Now, I've done a whole bunch of research, and importantly, it led to 3 conclusions about what we need to do in Lightroom to make our grain look like film. First of all, our grain in the midtones and the highlights should be more prominent than anywhere else in our image. In the extreme highlights and the extreme shadows, there should be next to no grain at all. And then thirdly, as the grain in the image goes up, our clarity and sharpness should come down. Because with film, grain is the smallest amount of detail you can have. So we shouldn't have any resolution or sharpness that's smaller than our grain. We're going to hop into Lightroom. I'm going to show you how to do it. And the best bit is you can save it as a preset so that you can do it once and never have to do it again. I'm super excited to show you. Let's jump in. So once you get into Lightroom, the first thing that you want to do is pick yourself an image that's going to benefit us in terms of making the preset. What you're looking for is an image that has some highlights and some shadows in it. A bright sunny day image is probably going to be your best bet, like this one I'm showing on the screen now, because we've got some bright sunny sky and the sun is also causing some quite dark shadows as well. Now we're going to go through the 3 things that we spoke about earlier. Now the first thing that we're going to need to do is just add a base amount of grain to our image. So if you scroll down on the edit panel and get to grain, by default, this will be set to 0. For now, we're going to set it to 20. Now from a size and roughness point of view, these are 2 settings that you set globally, and that's it. So if you want to tweak these now, feel free. I'm going to leave them and have a little play with them later. So starting off with our first point then, we want to increase the amount of grain in our midtones and our highlights compared to the rest of the image. Now to do that, we're going to want to go up to our masks, we're going to want to do a range, and we're going to want to do a luminance range. Now what this means is you can select a luminance range of your image and apply adjustments just to that. We're going to kick off by doing midtones and highlights. This works a little bit like the levels. So on the left hand side, we've got our extreme shadows. On the right, we've got our extreme highlights. So we're going to set this to 30 on the left. And we're going to go up to 97 on the right. Now this means we're selecting all of the values from 30 through to 97, which is the midtones and the highlights. What we're then going to do is scroll down and we're going to change our grain, and we're going to set this to 20 as well. Now what this actually means is the grain is set to 40 because we set it to 20 globally and we're now adding 20 on top. So the midtones and the highlights of our image actually have 40 grain being applied. Now, so that we don't forget our layers, because we're going to be making a few of them, if you scroll back up to the top and right click where it says mask 1, we're going to rename this to mids and highs and put plus 20 in there so we remember what we did. Because what we're going to do now is we're going to have a quick look at the shadows. We're going to create another new mask, another luminance range, and we're going to set this one from 5 through to 30. So this one is only selecting the shadows. And again, you can see it over on the left-hand side, everything in red is what's being affected. It's just the shadows. We're going to rename this mask so we don't get confused. We're going to call it shadows and we're going to call it plus 5. Now you can actually get away with adding no grain in this section at all. I'm going to add plus 5 because it's where I've found that you get the best results. You don't have to add anything here if you don't want to, but it'll make a little bit more sense when we get to something else later on. So now that we've got our shadows, mids and highs done, we're now going to go on to the second thing that we need to do. And that is make sure our extreme highlights and our extreme shadows don't have any grain being added at all. So let's create another new mask, another luminance range, and we're going to do this from 97 to 100. And you'll see that only is the extreme bright parts of our image. We're going to rename this mask whilst we're here and call it extreme highs. We're going to go down to the grain setting and we're going to set this to minus 20. Because it's globally set to 20 and this is then set to minus 20, there is actually no grain at all being applied to the highlights. We're going to do the same thing for the shadows now. So we're going to create another new mask, another luminance range, and this one is from 0 to 5. We're going to rename it Extreme Shadows. extreme shadows. And we're going to go down and we're going to also set this to a grain of -20, which means that there is no noise being applied to the shadows at all. Now you might think that we're done at this point, but if you have a zoom into a really bright part of your image, so in this case for me, up into the highlights, you can see that the cutover is really extreme. We'll go from an extreme highlight having no grain to a mid-tone suddenly having +40, and it looks a little bit ridiculous. The cutover is really extreme. I don't know how easy it's picking it up on my screen. So what we actually need to do now is add a bit of a feather to all of our luminance ranges. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of these that we just set up and add a feather of 10 onto them wherever we can. So we're going to click the extreme shadows, head down to our little section here, and there's this little symbol above it that if you drag it out, it starts to create our feather. We're going to add 10 onto whatever we've got set. So this 5 is going to go to 15. If we then go to our extreme highs, our 97, we're going to then blend this to 87. With our shadows, we can only go down to 0 from 5, and we can go up from 30 to 40. And our mids and highs, we can go from 30 down to 20, and we can go from 97 up to 100. If you zoom back into the sky now, it looks way better. There is no harsh cutovers, it's all nicely blended, but you can definitely see that extreme highlights have no grain in them at all. At this point, things are starting to look really good. We have ticked off 1 and 2 on our list, and we're moving on to number 3. So number 3 is the fact that wherever there is grain being added, we should also get rid of some of the sharpness or clarity. We're going to do it with the clarity slider. Sharpness doesn't seem to do too much in Lightroom, so let's go with clarity. Wherever we've added grain, we're going to do some minus clarity to just soften the image. Earlier on, I did +5 in the shadows, so I'm going to go down to clarity, and I'm going to set this to -10. If we then go to our mids and our highs, earlier on we added 20 grain here. I'm going to set this to -20 clarity. And then an optional one for you. It depends on what sort of look you're going for. With the extreme highlights, really we don't need to do much here at all. But I really like adding a really low clarity figure here because it adds this like bloom effect to your highlights. And because it's only affecting a really small proportion of your image, it doesn't feel overkill at all. So I'm actually going to set the clarity here to -30. It looks a bit extreme, but if you turn the filter on and off, you can see this sort of blooming effect that it has to the highlights. And I absolutely love how that looks. So at this point, we have done all 3 of the things that we set out to do. Now to save us from ever having to do this again, we're now going to save this as a preset. If you head up to your presets, click the little plus button, let's call this medium grain, and then save it wherever you want to save it. I'm going to create a new group and we're going to call it grain presets. Then what you're going to want to do is deselect everything, so selection none. Then we only want to select our 4 masks for this preset, and then down in the effects, we want to make sure that we have only ticked grain. This means that all of the other settings will remain the same if you apply this onto an image that's already been edited, and then click save. So now if you want to apply this grain preset to someone else, you just need to go to your image, go to your film presets, medium grain, and on it goes. Now, if you're using Lightroom Cloud, wait for your image to actually download and then the grain will be applied. Before the image is properly downloaded, it can make the grain look really ridiculous. But one of the really cool things that you can do from here is mess around with the amount slider. If you want more grain in your image, just move the amount slider up. It's really cool. The other really cool thing that's happening here as well is if we go back to the edit panel and we increase our exposure, as we increase the exposure, where the grain is in the image moves. So as more things go into highlight, it starts to get rid of the grain. As things come out of shadow, more grain goes in. I absolutely love messing around with this. Now this is actually this done, but if you want to save yourself a bit of time and you don't want to make this yourself, or you're interested in the 5 different variations that I've made for 200, 400, 800, 1600 and 3200 ISO film, you can head to my website and download the 5 presets for the price of a coffee. It really does help support the channel. If you don't want to do that, that's absolutely fine. I've shown you everything you need to know here, but I have spent a few hours messing around with this to try and dial in some film ISOs at different ratings, and and I've been having a lot of fun with it. So if you do want to help support the channel and you want to download those, they're over on my website now. Thank you guys for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.